The evening air was cool and calm when the letter arrived, sealed with gold trim and stamped with the crest of the grand Ballroom of Elegance. Inside a modest apartment on the top floor of an old building, a young pianist sat beside her worn-out upright piano, trying to finish a melody she had been shaping for weeks. The moment she saw the letter, she almost thought it was a mistake. Invitations like that didn't come to people like her. She opened it slowly, afraid even her breath might tear it. The handwriting was delicate and formal, the kind she had only seen on concert posters or expensive menus. It said she was being invited to perform at the annual gala held in the ballroom, an event known for drawing the richest families, art critics, and musicians from across the country. The note even mentioned that she would be the evening's featured performer. Her first reaction was disbelief. She read the lines again and again until her eyes blurred. Then she looked at the piano, its wood faded, some keys chipped, and laughed softly. "They must have sent this to the wrong person," she murmured. But her name was printed clearly at the top. For years she had played in quiet cafes and small-town theaters, sometimes earning little more than applause and a cup of tea. She had never performed before an audience dressed in silk gowns and tailored suits. Still, something inside her whispered that she had to go. She owed it to the little girl who once dreamed of hearing her music in places where chandeliers glowed and people listened not just with their ears but with their hearts. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city hummed outside, but her mind was filled with thoughts of what to wear, what to play, and whether she was good enough. She had always told her students that courage isn't the absence of fear, but walking through it. Now she had to live those words herself. In the following days, she prepared the only way she knew, by practicing until her fingers ached. The piece she chose wasn't one of the famous classical works that audiences expected. It was something she had written herself, a soft, emotional tune inspired by her father. He had been the first to place her tiny hands on piano keys, guiding her through the simple notes of a lullaby when she was barely tall enough to reach them. Her father used to say that music had its own language, one that didn't need translation. Even after he passed away, she heard his voice whenever she played. It gave her comfort during lonely nights when money was short and the world seemed too loud for someone like her. As the day of the gala approached, she borrowed a simple black dress from her neighbor, one she altered herself with a few careful stitches. It wasn't glamorous, but it fit her gently, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw not a poor pianist but a woman ready to tell her story through music. The taxi ride to the ballroom felt unreal. The city lights blurred past the window, reflections of gold and silver mixing with the beating of her heart. When the car stopped before the grand building, she looked up in awe. The marble steps gleamed under soft lamps and the tall doors stood open, revealing a hall filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. She stepped inside quietly, trying to stay out of the way of guests arriving in long coats and glittering jewelry. The floor shone like glass, polished so perfectly that it reflected every sparkle from the chandeliers above. Waiters carried trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres, weaving gracefully through the crowd. Someone at the entrance checked her name on a list, paused for a moment, then gave a polite nod. "Welcome, miss. The piano is waiting for you." The words sent a wave of nervous excitement through her chest. She could hardly believe she was about to play in the same hall where world-renowned musicians had performed. As she walked farther in, she noticed people glancing her way. Some smiled kindly. Others seemed puzzled, whispering behind their glasses. She knew that look. It was the same one she had seen when she auditioned for a music academy years ago and was told she didn't have the polish. She remembered how that rejection had stung, how it made her practice even harder in her small apartment until her fingertips turned sore. Now facing a sea of elegant faces, she felt that old fear rise again, but she refused to let it take over. A woman in a shimmering silver gown approached her. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from wealth and reputation. "You must be our special performer," the woman said, smiling just enough to seem polite. "I'm the event organizer. I trust you've brought your music sheets?" The pianist nodded and held up her folder. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be ready when you need me." The woman's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes scanned the pianist from head to toe. "Good. The audience has very high expectations tonight. We've had some of the finest players grace this stage." "I'll do my best," the pianist replied quietly. "I'm sure you will," the woman said, then turned away to greet another guest. leaving a faint trace of doubt in the air. She found a quiet corner near the side of the stage and sat down, her hands trembling slightly. The orchestra finished tuning their instruments, and a low hum of conversation filled the hall. Every sound seemed magnified: the rustle of dresses, the laughter of wealthy patrons, the clink of glasses. She tried to block it all out and focus on the reason she was there. When her turn finally came, the host announced her name. The lights dimmed slightly and the crowd's chatter faded. She walked to the piano, feeling as though every step echoed louder than the last. Her dress brushed softly against her ankles, and the warmth of the spotlight made her skin tingle. The grand piano stood like a black mirror beneath the chandelier. She took a deep breath, sat down, and adjusted the bench. Her reflection shimmered on the piano's surface. Calm face, anxious eyes. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. For a moment, everything went still. She could hear the faint ticking of a clock somewhere behind the stage, and the murmur of someone shifting in their seat. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper testing the air. Then the melody grew, unfolding into something rich and alive. The tune carried a quiet sorrow mixed with hope, weaving through the room like a story told without words. As she played, the world outside the music disappeared. She wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was back in her childhood home, sitting beside her father as he hummed along to the same melody. She could almost smell the faint scent of old sheet music and coffee from the kitchen. The audience listened, some leaning forward, others closing their eyes. Even the waiters stopped for a moment, trays balanced in their hands. The music seemed to wrap around everyone, softening the edges of the night. Her fingers moved faster now, dancing across the keys as emotion poured out of her. She thought of all the nights she had played alone, the times she doubted herself, and the dreams she nearly gave up. Every note carried a piece of that journey. When the piece reached its final chords, she slowed down, letting each sound linger. The last note hung in the air like a sigh, delicate and full of meaning. Silence followed. A deep, almost sacred silence. For a few seconds she thought she had failed, that maybe they didn't understand. Then someone began to clap. Another joined. Soon the entire hall erupted in applause that seemed to shake the chandeliers. She stood up, her heart racing, unsure how to react. People were on their feet, cheering, some even shouting her name. The woman in the silver gown was clapping too, though this time her expression had softened into something close to admiration. The pianist bowed gently, blinking back tears. She had come to the ballroom as a stranger, but she was leaving as someone heard, someone seen. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged not because of her background, but because of the truth she shared through her music. As she left the stage, a young boy from the catering staff handed her a small white rose. "That was beautiful," he said shyly. She smiled, taking the flower. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with gratitude. Outside, the night was cool again, the stars bright against the city sky. She held the rose close and looked back at the glowing windows of the ballroom. Inside, the applause was still fading, but the echo of her melody seemed to drift through the air, gentle and alive. For her, it wasn't just a performance. It was a promise fulfilled, a moment that proved music could cross every wall, every doubt, and reach even the most guarded hearts. She walked away slowly, her steps light, her mind replaying the notes she had played. The sound of the piano still lived inside her, and she knew it always would. After that unforgettable night, life seemed to move in two different directions at once. On one side, everything was changing. Her name began to appear in newspapers, and people she had never met before wanted to meet her, to hear her play, to offer her places to perform. On the other side, her world still felt the same. The same small apartment, the same piano with chipped keys, and the same soft light from the window that always fell across her sheet music every morning. She had never been the kind of person who dreamed about fame. She only wanted to play, to make music that meant something. So when people began calling her a rising star, she didn't quite know how to feel. She smiled politely, thanked them, and went home to practice because that was the only thing that felt real to her. A week after the gala, she received another letter. This one wasn't gold or fancy. It was written by hand in a neat but trembling script. The letter came from an elderly man named Thomas Gray, who introduced himself as a conductor and composer. He had been in the audience that night. He wrote that her performance reminded him of something he had lost long ago, the raw honesty of music, He asked if she would be willing to meet him for tea. She hesitated for a day or two before agreeing. They met in a quiet cafe by the river, one with large windows and the smell of freshly baked bread. When she arrived, she saw him sitting near the corner table wearing a simple wool coat and a kind expression. "I hope you don't mind me calling you here," he said, standing to greet her. "I had to tell you in person what your performance meant to me." She smiled shyly. "That's very kind of you. I'm just glad you enjoyed it," he shook his head. "No, you don't understand. Most people play to impress. You played to tell the truth. That's rare." They talked for hours, about music, about the loneliness of practice, about the strange way art can connect strangers. She learned that he had once conducted major orchestras across Europe, but had retired after losing his hearing in one ear. "It was like losing a language," he said softly, "but hearing your piece brought it back for a moment." Before they parted, he asked if she would visit his home studio sometime. "I still have an old grand piano there," he said. "Maybe we could play together, while I still have enough hearing to catch your notes." She agreed, feeling touched by his sincerity. Over the next few weeks, they met often. His home was filled with music sheets, instruments, and photos of concerts from long ago. He would sit near the piano, eyes half closed, and listen as she played. Sometimes he would hum along or gently correct her phrasing. Other times he would sit in silence, lost in thought. One day, while going through some of his old folders, he handed her a faded photograph. It showed a young woman at a piano, smiling brightly, surrounded by musicians. "This was taken here many years ago," he said. "Do you notice anything familiar?" She looked closer and froze. The woman in the picture had the same eyes, the same gentle curve in her smile. "That's my mother," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I thought so." She looked up, startled. "You knew her?" "I did," he said with a faint smile. "She was one of the most gifted pianists I ever worked with. She had dreams of performing at the Grand Ballroom, but life took a different turn for her. I didn't know she had a daughter who played." The words hit her like a quiet wave. Her mother had died when she was a child, leaving behind only a few notebooks and one broken metronome. No one had ever told her much about her past, and now here was someone who could fill in those empty spaces. "She used to play with such emotion," he said softly, "but she never got the recognition she deserved. The world wasn't kind to women in her time." For a long moment they sat in silence. The air between them was heavy, filled with both sadness and warmth. She finally said, "I think she'd be happy to know I played in that ballroom." "I think so too," he replied with a gentle nod. From that day on, their bond grew stronger. He became not only her mentor but also a friend, a reminder that kindness still existed in the world of art, which could often feel cold and competitive. He helped her refine her technique, teaching her how to shape emotion without losing control. "Don't let the notes carry you away," he would say. "Guide them gently, the way a mother guides a child across the street." Her music matured, and so did her confidence. Invitations started coming in from other cities, small concerts, radio interviews, even a few charity events. But she never forgot where she started. Whenever she could, she returned to her tiny apartment to teach children from the neighborhood. Their laughter and curiosity reminded her why she fell in love with music in the first place. One of her students, a little girl with bright eyes, once asked, "Do you ever get scared before playing in front of people?" "All the time," she answered honestly. "But when I sit at the piano, it's just me and the music. Everyone else disappears." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "That's how I feel when I sing in class." They both laughed. Months passed and the seasons began to change. One morning while she was teaching, her phone buzzed with a message from Lady Carrington, the elegant woman who had organized the gala. The message was short and formal. "The board has decided to host a winter concert in the Grand Ballroom. We would be honored if you would perform again." Her heart raced as she read the words. Performing there once had been a dream. Returning there now as an invited artist felt unreal. She immediately called Mr. Gray to tell him. "They want me to play again," she said, her voice shaking. "That's wonderful," he said. "You should play something new, something that shows who you've become." She nodded, though he couldn't see her. "I'll compose a new piece, something honest." In the days that followed, she worked tirelessly. Morning to night, she sat at her piano trying to capture everything she had lived through: loss, hope, friendship, and the rediscovery of her mother's story. The melody came slowly, piece by piece, like memories finding their way back home. Sometimes she would call Mr. Gray to play a part over the phone. "It's beautiful," he'd say, "but don't rush it. Let the music breathe." Finally, after weeks of work, she finished the piece. It was gentle and emotional, filled with quiet strength. She titled it "The Echo of Grace." The night of the concert arrived on a snowy evening. The ballroom looked even more stunning than before, its crystal lights reflecting off the white frost outside. She wore the same simple black dress as last time, but this time she carried herself differently. There was calmness in her eyes, the quiet assurance of someone who knew why she was there. Backstage, she waited as other performers played their pieces. She could hear the applause, the murmurs of appreciation, the gentle shuffle of programs being folded. Then, at last, it was her turn. As she stepped onto the stage, she glanced toward the audience. In the second row, she saw Mr. Gray smiling proudly. His hearing aid glinted faintly under the light. She sat down and took a deep breath. The piano felt familiar under her hands, warm, alive. She began to play. The first notes of the Echo of Grace were soft and fragile, like snowflakes landing on glass. The melody soon deepened, carrying warmth beneath the cold. It was her mother's spirit she felt in those keys and her father's voice guiding her from afar. The music rose and fell like a heartbeat. The audience leaned in, listening not just to her notes but to the story inside them. The tune spoke of memories long buried, of love that never fades, of finding light again after years of shadow. By the time the final note faded, her eyes were wet. She didn't even realize she had been crying until the audience stood and applauded. Mr. Gray was already on his feet, clapping the loudest. She smiled through her tears, bowing deeply, her heart full. That night, when she stepped outside into the falling snow, she didn't feel like the same person who once doubted her place in the world. She felt connected, to her parents, to her mentor, and to every person who had ever listened and felt something. Her melody had once echoed through the ballroom. Now, it echoed through her own heart, stronger than ever. She looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "Thank you." Then she smiled and walked home, the sound of her music still following her through the quiet streets. The morning after the winter concert, she woke to a quiet apartment filled with soft light. Her piano stood by the window, the sheet music for the Echo of Grace still open, the notes catching a faint glimmer from the sun. For a moment, she sat at the edge of her bed, letting the memory of the previous night wash over her, the applause, the faces in the audience, and the smile of her mentor sitting proudly in the second row. It had all felt like a dream. She brewed a cup of tea and sat by the piano, touching the keys gently, as if greeting an old friend. The world outside her window was covered in a thin layer of snow. Everything felt still, peaceful, and yet there was something new in her heart. She wasn't just the girl from the small town anymore. She was someone whose music had reached beyond those narrow streets. Later that day, she visited Mr. Gray. His home smelled of old wood and books just as always. He was seated near the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in his hand. When she entered, he looked up and smiled warmly. "I knew you would do it," he said. "Your performance last night. It wasn't just music. It was a story. You made people feel." She sat beside him, a little shy. "I was so nervous," she admitted. "But when I started playing, I felt her there, my mother. It was like she was guiding me." He nodded slowly. "Music has that power. It connects us to the ones we've loved, to the things we've lost, even to the parts of ourselves we forget." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The crackling fire filled the quiet between them. Then he said softly, "You have a gift, my dear. But remember, the world will soon start asking things of you. They'll want you to play what sells, not what speaks. Promise me you'll never lose the heart in your music." "I promise," she said, her voice steady. In the months that followed, life began to change faster than she ever expected. Offers came from music halls, radio stations, and even a recording company in the city. Her name started to appear in magazines, her picture printed under headlines like, "The Pianist Who Plays from the Soul." She tried to stay humble, but fame had a strange way of making things complicated. At first, she accepted a few performances, intimate concerts in old theaters, charity events, and small interviews. People admired her sincerity, her natural grace. But soon, agents and producers began reaching out with big offers, some too tempting to ignore. They wanted to record her albums, organize international tours, and even have her perform with famous orchestras. She should have been overjoyed. But instead, she felt uncertain. Every time she sat down to play, she missed the quiet, the simplicity, the feeling of music being hers alone. One afternoon, while she was practicing in her apartment, a man named Daniel from a large recording studio came to visit. He was polite, confident, and spoke quickly, like someone always in a hurry. "You have something special," he told her. "Something people can feel. If we record your music properly, we can share it with the world. Imagine thousands listening to you. You'll inspire people everywhere." She smiled politely, but his words carried a hint of pressure. "I like the idea of sharing my music," she said carefully. "But I want to make sure it stays honest." He nodded. Of course. We'll just need a few changes. Make the song shorter, more modern. Maybe add a little rhythm section. Something radio-friendly." She hesitated. "But that's not really who I am." Daniel's smile never faded. "You have to adapt if you want to stay relevant. The world moves fast, and talent alone doesn't keep up." He left his card on her piano and promised to call again. When the door closed, she sat staring at the piano, feeling a heaviness in her chest. She wasn't sure she wanted to chase fame that way. That evening, she visited Mr. Gray again. The fire was out and his hands were trembling more than usual. He was getting weaker, though he never complained. When she told him about the recording offer, he listened quietly. "You already know the answer," he said after a while. "Don't let them change your song." She nodded slowly. "But what if I lose this chance?" "Then you'll find another one," he said. "The world doesn't need another copy of what already exists. It needs truth. Play for truth, not applause." Those words stayed with her. In the following days, she spent long hours at her piano, working on new pieces. Some were inspired by the city, the way rain hit the rooftops, the rhythm of footsteps outside her window. Others came from her memories of home, of her father's laughter and her mother's soft humming. Each melody felt like a conversation between who she used to be and who she was becoming. Then, one morning, as she was finishing a composition, the phone rang. It was the Grand Ballroom's coordinator. "We're organizing a special anniversary gala next month," the woman said. "We would be honored if you would return to perform one of your own compositions. The entire event will be broadcast live." Her breath caught. "Broadcast?" "Yes, it's a celebration of the arts. People across the country will be watching." She hesitated. The thought of playing in front of cameras and a massive audience frightened her. But she also knew this was something her mother would have dreamed of. "I'll do it," she said softly. When she hung up, she felt both excitement and fear rising inside her. This performance would be different from anything she had done before. It would reach beyond the ballroom, beyond the city. Over the next few weeks, she poured her heart into creating something new. She wanted the piece to be more than music, to be a bridge between past and present, between her and her mother. The melody was tender and powerful, filled with both longing and hope. She named it "The Tune That Never Ends." But as the night of the gala drew closer, worry crept into her mind. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing on her shoulders. People weren't just waiting to hear her play. They were waiting to judge, to compare, to decide whether her fame was deserved. On the day of the concert, the ballroom was more radiant than ever. Gold lights shimmered across the floor and cameras lined the walls. Reporters whispered in corners, and guests took their seats in quiet anticipation. Backstage, she sat alone, breathing deeply. Mr. Gray couldn't attend this time. His health had worsened, but he had sent her a short note that read, "Play like the world isn't watching. Play for the ones who can't." She held that note tightly in her hand, then tucked it into her pocket. When the announcer called her name, she walked out slowly. The hall was silent except for the soft rustle of gowns and suits. She took her seat, closed her eyes for a moment, and placed her hands on the piano. The first note echoed gently through the room, clear and steady. Then the melody began to unfold, rising and falling like a breath. It was delicate but strong, carrying years of struggle, memory, and quiet strength. People watched, transfixed. Even the camera operators seemed still. Halfway through, something unexpected happened. One of the lights above flickered and went out, casting part of the stage in shadow. For a split second, the crowd murmured, but she kept playing. Her focus didn't break. If anything, the dim light made the moment even more intimate. It was as if the universe itself was dimming its brightness to listen more closely. When she reached the final note, the sound lingered in the air like a sigh. Then silence again, thick and full like the hush before dawn, and then came the applause. Not the polite kind. It was thunderous, heartfelt, rising from every corner of the ballroom. Some stood, clapping until their hands turned red. Others wiped tears from their eyes. She stood and bowed, overwhelmed. In the corner of her vision, she saw one of the cameras flashing. She smiled faintly, not for the fame, but because she had stayed true to herself. Later that night, back home, she sat by her piano once more. The applause still echoed in her mind, but it wasn't what she was thinking about. She was thinking of Mr. Gray, hoping he had been able to hear her performance through the radio. She was thinking of her mother, whose dream had now been fulfilled in the most unexpected way. She pressed one key softly, letting the sound drift into the quiet room. It was just a single note, but it carried everything she was, and as the night deepened outside her window, she whispered, "The tune never ends." The next morning after the grand televised concert, the city seemed quieter than usual. The streets were still glistening from the rain that had fallen through the night. Inside her small apartment, she sat near her piano, the one that had carried her through every struggle and every victory. A few white roses left by her students sat in a glass jar beside it. She reached out and ran her fingers along the keys but didn't play anything. The silence itself felt like a song she was still learning to understand. Her phone kept buzzing with messages, journalists asking for interviews, organizers sending invitations, producers offering contracts. It was everything she had once dreamed of. Yet now that it was real, it didn't feel the way she imagined. Fame had a strange way of changing things. People who never noticed her before suddenly spoke as if they had known her all their lives. Strangers online debated her performances, praising some moments and criticizing others. But she wasn't angry. She just felt distant from it all. She didn't play for applause, and she never had. She played because music was how she spoke when words failed. That evening, she received a letter, not by email or messenger, but a real letter, written in careful handwriting. It was from Mr. Gray's housekeeper. The words were short and gentle. "He isn't well. He keeps asking for you." Her hands trembled as she read the line again. She didn't wait. She grabbed her coat, tucked her scarf around her neck, and left immediately. The winter wind brushed against her cheeks as she walked quickly through the dim streets. When she reached his house, she saw the light still on in the window. The door opened before she could even knock, and the housekeeper led her quietly to the small sitting room where he usually listened to her play. Mr. Gray sat in his chair, a blanket around his shoulders, his breathing shallow but steady. His eyes brightened when he saw her. "I knew you'd come," he said softly, his voice weaker than she remembered. She knelt beside him and took his hand gently. "Of course I came," she said. "You shouldn't be up like this," he smiled faintly. "Old habits. I wanted to see you. I listened to your performance on the radio. It was beautiful. You played with truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought of you the whole time," she whispered. He looked at her piano bag resting against the wall. "Will you play for me one more time?" She hesitated. "Now? You should rest." He gave a faint laugh. "Music is the only rest I know." She stood and went to the piano in the corner, the one they had practiced on together so many times. It was slightly out of tune, but she didn't care. When she pressed the keys, the sound came out gentle and fragile, like a heartbeat fading into stillness. She began to play The Tune That Never Ends, her most recent piece, though this time slower, softer, each note stretched out like a memory. As she played, she looked over at him. His eyes were closed, but his lips moved slightly, whispering the rhythm as if counting each beat. The fire crackled softly beside them, filling the space between the music and the silence. When the final note faded, she sat quietly, afraid to break the moment. "That was perfect," he whispered after a long pause. "Your mother would have been proud." Her voice trembled. "Did you ever see her play?" "Yes," he said. "Once at a small concert no one remembers. But I do. She played with the same heart you have. She told me once that her greatest dream wasn't fame. It was to have someone truly listen. You've given her that." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She couldn't speak. He squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me something," he said. No matter what the world offers you, no matter how loud it gets, don't let them change your melody. I promise, she said through quiet sobs. He smiled faintly. Good. Good. They talked a little longer, mostly in fragments of memories and small laughter. Then he leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed. You should go, he murmured. Get some rest. She nodded, though her heart told her to stay. But he insisted, so she kissed his forehead and whispered, I'll visit again tomorrow. That night she walked home slowly through the snow, the city lights glowing softly around her. She didn't know it then, but that was the last time she would see him awake. The next morning, the same housekeeper called. Her voice was calm but heavy. He passed peacefully during the night, she said. For a long time, she couldn't move. The phone slipped from her hand and she sat by the piano, staring at nothing. The world outside continued as usual, but inside her, everything stopped. That evening, she returned to his home. The fire was cold now. His chair was empty, a book resting open on the table beside it. On the piano stood a small envelope with her name on it. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a short letter, written in his careful handwriting. Keep playing, even when no one is listening. The world needs the quiet hearts too. She pressed the note to her chest and cried for a long time. Days passed. Then weeks. The world continued to call for her performances, but she couldn't bring herself to accept. Every time she touched the keys, she heard his voice in her mind, felt the emptiness where his presence used to be. Then one evening, as the rain fell outside, she sat alone by the piano and realized something. The silence that hurt so much wasn't empty. It was full of everything he had taught her. His words, his lessons, his quiet belief in her, all of it lived inside the stillness. So she began to play again, slowly at first, then with growing warmth. The music was different now, deeper, more fragile, but full of peace. It wasn't just her sound anymore. It was theirs. A few months later, she received an invitation from a cultural foundation in another city. They wanted to host a tribute concert in memory of Mr. Gray, and they asked her to perform as the final act. She hesitated at first, afraid that the emotions would overwhelm her. But then she thought of what he had written. Keep playing, even when no one is listening. The concert was held in a hall much smaller than the grand ballroom, but filled with people who loved music from the heart. Students, teachers, fellow musicians, and families who simply came to feel something real. When it was her turn, she walked to the piano in a simple white dress. No lights flashed, no cameras rolled. It was just her, the piano, and a quiet crowd waiting. She began with one of his favorite pieces, an old classical tune he had often hummed during their lessons. Then after a long pause, she introduced her final piece. This song, she said softly, is for the person who taught me that silence can also sing. Her voice trembled slightly, but when she began to play, the fear disappeared. The melody was gentle and full of gratitude. Each note seemed to carry the weight of memory, the laughter they shared, the lessons he gave, the kindness that changed her path. People in the audience leaned forward, some with closed eyes, others with tears glistening. When the final chord rang out, it felt like time stopped. Then came the applause, not loud but full of warmth, like a collective heartbeat of understanding. After the concert, as people came to thank her, she noticed a young boy standing near the edge of the stage, holding a worn-out sheet of music. He looked nervous but determined. Miss, he said quietly, I'm learning piano too. When you played, it felt like the music was talking. How do you do that? She smiled through her tears. You just have to listen, she said. Not to me, not even to the piano, but to what's inside you. That's where the real song begins. He nodded slowly, clutching the sheet music closer. That night she returned home, lit a candle, and placed Mr. Gray's letter beside her piano. Then she sat down and began working on a new piece, a song about loss, but also about love that never fades. She didn't rush it. Every note came naturally, softly, like conversation. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was quiet again. As she played, she smiled faintly, knowing that somewhere in some unseen place, he was listening. The melody rose and fell like a whisper of gratitude. And as the final note drifted into silence, she looked up at the ceiling and whispered, Thank you for never letting my song end. The room stayed still. filled only with the soft echo of her piano, a reminder that even when the people we love leave, their music always remains within us, steady and everlasting. Months had passed since the tribute concert. The city had changed with the seasons. Spring had come quietly, painting every corner with soft colors and a sense of renewal. She had settled into a new rhythm of life, teaching during the day, composing at night, and playing for herself whenever the world felt too heavy. She still lived in the same small apartment with its cracked walls and warm light. The piano stood near the window, its polished wood catching the morning sun. Sometimes she would sit with a cup of tea, staring out at the street below as the world slowly woke up. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and peace, she had learned, was more precious than applause. One morning, while she was practicing a soft melody, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, a man in a dark blue suit stood there holding a thick envelope. "Good morning," he said politely. "I'm from the Royal Arts Foundation. We're organizing a series of performances for young musicians across the country. We've been following your work and we'd like you to lead the program." She blinked in surprise. "Lead it? You mean teach them?" He smiled. "Teach, perform, guide, whatever you feel is right. We believe you have something more than talent. You have heart. And that's what the next generation needs." Her fingers tightened around the door frame. For a moment, she was silent. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll do it," she said. That evening, she sat at her piano again, thinking of what this meant. Mr. Gray would have smiled if he were here. She remembered his words. Keep playing even when no one is listening. Now she would be helping others find their sound, too. The first workshop took place in a small town far from the city. The hall was old but filled with excitement. Around 30 students gathered, each carrying their own story. Some shy, some confident, all eager to learn. When she entered, the room went quiet. The students stood waiting. She smiled gently. "Please sit," she said. "This isn't about perfection. It's about honesty. Music should feel like a heartbeat, not a test." The students relaxed a little, and she began by asking them to close their eyes. "Think of someone or something you love deeply," she said softly. "Now, without speaking, play what that love sounds like." At first, there was hesitation. Then slowly the room filled with fragile melodies. Soft, uncertain, but full of emotion. Some were uneven, some slightly off-key, yet every note carried truth. She walked among them, listening, offering small nods of encouragement. When the session ended, one of the students, a young girl with trembling hands, approached her. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I've always been scared to play in front of people. But today, when you said to play what love feels like, it didn't feel scary anymore." She smiled and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "That's because love doesn't judge," she said. "Neither should your music." By the end of the week, the entire hall sounded alive. Students who had once played mechanically now poured themselves into each note. They laughed, shared stories, and stayed late just to keep playing together. It reminded her of her own early days, the hope, the hunger, the need to be understood. One evening, as she was packing up her things, one of the organizers came to her with a letter. "This came for you," he said. She opened it and froze when she saw the signature. It was from an old acquaintance from her conservatory days, a friend she hadn't spoken to in years. "I heard about your workshops," the letter read. "I'd like to collaborate on a new concert, something that brings together musicians from across the country. A performance not for fame, but for harmony. Let's create something the world needs, a reminder that music still heals." She folded the letter carefully, her heart warm. The idea felt right. Weeks later, the plan took shape. The performance would be called Echoes of Kindness. It would feature young musicians from all backgrounds, students, teachers, and even local street performers who played for coins but carried the soul of true artists. She traveled across cities, towns, and small villages searching for those voices. In one town, she found a boy who played an old harmonica with surprising beauty. In another, a woman who played violin by the riverside, her music full of memories. Everywhere she went, she met people who didn't have much but gave everything to their music. By the time she returned home, her notebook was filled with names, songs, and stories. The concert would not be about her. It would be about all of them. When rehearsals began, the ballroom chosen for the event was grand but welcoming. As she walked across the stage for the first time, she felt something stir in her chest. It was the same hall where she had once performed alone, The night her life had changed. But now she wouldn't be alone. The space would echo with dozens of hearts. During the first rehearsal, things didn't go perfectly. Some players were nervous, others clashed over tempo and timing. She watched quietly for a while, then stepped forward. "Stop," she said gently. The room fell silent. She walked to the piano and sat down. "Listen," she said. She began to play a soft tune, simple, steady, and pure. "Music isn't about showing who's better. It's about finding where we meet. When we listen to each other, even mistakes sound beautiful." The others watched her fingers move across the keys, and slowly they began to follow. The violin joined in, then the flute, then the cello. Within minutes, the sound became one, soft but powerful, imperfect but whole. When the last note faded, no one spoke. But something had changed. The tension had melted, replaced by quiet understanding. Over the next few days, the rehearsals became filled with laughter and shared energy. They weren't just preparing for a performance, they were creating a community. The night of the concert arrived. The ballroom glowed with golden light just as it had years ago. People filled the seats, whispering in excitement. But unlike before, there were no flashing cameras or reporters chasing stories. The audience was made up of families, friends, and strangers who simply loved music. Backstage, she stood looking out at the crowd. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't her story anymore, it was everyone's. When she stepped onto the stage, the room grew silent. She took a deep breath, smiled at the orchestra behind her, and began to play. The opening notes were soft and tender, the same melody she had once played for Mr. Gray. It flowed gently through the hall, wrapping around every listener like a familiar embrace. Then, one by one, the other instruments joined in: violin, flute, cello, and more. The music rose like sunlight breaking through clouds. Each player had their own moment, their own voice, yet they blended seamlessly into one sound. The audience leaned forward, drawn into the wave of harmony. Halfway through, she glanced toward the ceiling, imagining Mr. Gray watching from somewhere beyond. She smiled faintly and played with all her heart. When the final note echoed through the ballroom, there was a pause, just like before. Then the applause came, not loud or wild, but deep and sincere. People stood, some with tears in their eyes, clapping not just for her but for the unity they had all witnessed. After the show, she didn't rush backstage. She stayed for a while, watching people talk and smile. The young musicians hugged one another, laughing, promising to keep in touch. Later, as the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, she sat alone at the piano again. The silence didn't feel lonely, it felt full. She thought about how far she had come, about the people she had met, and about the man who had once told her not to lose her melody. Her life wasn't about grand stages or perfect performances anymore. It was about sharing, about letting music be the bridge between hearts. As she closed the piano lid softly, she whispered, "This is what you meant, isn't it?" The night air drifted through the open window, carrying the faint echo of the music that had filled the hall. Somewhere in that stillness, she felt peace, a quiet assurance that her tune would keep echoing, not through fame or fortune, but through the lives she had touched. She stood, took one last look at the piano, and walked out into the soft light of the evening. The world outside was alive with distant sounds, laughter, footsteps, the rhythm of everyday life. And in all of it, she could hear the faintest trace of music, as if the city itself had learned to hum along. It had been a full year since the night of echoes of kindness. Life had found a steady rhythm once again. The seasons changed quietly, and so did she. The city that once felt overwhelming now felt like home, a place where every sound carried a small memory. The honking of cars, the chatter of neighbors, even the faint hum of distant street performers, all of it felt like tiny notes in the long song of her life. She spent most mornings near her piano, sipping tea and letting her fingers wander over the keys without thinking too much. The music came naturally, like breathing. Sometimes she played for hours, lost in the sound, forgetting about everything else. Other times she simply sat there watching the light fall across the piano, feeling thankful for the quiet. Her workshops had grown. More students came each month, not just from nearby towns but from other cities too. Many said her story inspired them, the way she kept playing even when the world seemed too loud or too quiet. But she always told them the same thing. "It's not my story that matters. It's what you do with yours." One afternoon, as she was finishing a class, a tall man entered the studio carrying a small envelope. "Are you the pianist who led Echoes of Kindness?" he asked. She nodded. He smiled kindly and handed her the letter. "I was asked to deliver this to you personally." She opened it after he left. Inside was an elegant note written in neat handwriting. It came from the Royal Grand Hall, the same ballroom where her journey had truly begun. The letter invited her to perform again, not as a rising star this time, but as the guest of honor at a celebration marking the hall's 100th anniversary. For a moment, she just stared at the paper. So many memories flooded back. The nerves, the first performance, the people who believed in her, and the ones she had lost along the way. That night, she sat at her piano thinking deeply. Returning to that hall felt like going back to where it all started, but she wondered what she could possibly play that would mean something new. She closed her eyes and let her hands rest on the keys. Slowly, a melody began to form, gentle, thoughtful, yet full of life. It wasn't sad or heavy. It carried the warmth of every person who had touched her journey. The students, the street performers, the kind faces she met in every city, and most of all, Mr. Gray. The song didn't have a name yet, but she felt it growing inside her, like a quiet sunrise. Over the next few weeks, she wrote every night. The music came in waves, some soft, some intense. There were moments she had to stop and wipe her eyes, not from sadness, but from how deeply she felt every note. She wasn't chasing perfection. She just wanted to tell the truth. Finally, the day of the performance arrived. The morning air was cool and calm. She wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant, and carried her music folder close to her chest. When she arrived at the hall, the staff greeted her warmly, many remembering her earlier performances. The grand chandelier still sparkled, though it looked older now, as if it had witnessed generations of stories. Backstage, she stood alone for a few minutes, breathing slowly. The muffled sound of the audience settling filled the space. She could feel the same nervous flutter in her stomach that she felt years ago, but this time it didn't scare her. It reminded her she was alive. When her name was announced, she walked to the piano with quiet confidence. The applause faded quickly as the audience waited. She sat down, rested her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. The first note was soft, barely a whisper. Then another followed, and another, until the melody began to weave itself through the air. It was the song she had written over those long, quiet nights, a reflection of everything she had lived through. The music spoke without words. It carried the sound of a young girl's first dream, the laughter shared in a dusty practice room, the wisdom of an old mentor, the tears of farewell, and the courage to begin again. Every chord carried a piece of her heart. The audience sat perfectly still. The music grew stronger, flowing like a river, and then softened again like a lullaby. Near the end, she paused briefly, just a few seconds of silence. In that silence, she could almost feel him there beside her, smiling, nodding in quiet approval. When she played the final note, it lingered gently before fading into the air. She kept her eyes closed for a moment, letting the silence wrap around her. Then came the applause. It started softly, then grew into a standing ovation. People rose to their feet, clapping not only for the beauty of the performance, but for the journey they could somehow feel within it. She stood slowly and bowed. Her eyes glistened, but her smile was peaceful. She didn't feel like the girl who once doubted herself. She felt complete, like every note she'd ever played had led her to this one moment. After the concert, as guests came to congratulate her, an elderly woman approached quietly. "That song," she said softly. "It felt like you were telling a story without speaking." The pianist smiled. "Maybe I was," she said. "It's a story of how music never really ends, it just changes hands." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "You reminded me of why I fell in love with music in the first place." That night, long after the hall had emptied, she stayed behind for a while. The lights were dim, the chairs stacked neatly, and the echo of applause still faintly lingered in the corners. She walked to the center of the stage, looked up at the ceiling, and whispered, "Thank you for everything." She sat down once more and played the melody quietly, just for herself. It sounded softer now, almost like a lullaby to the past. When she finally left the hall, she didn't feel sadness. She felt gratitude. Days turned into weeks again, and life continued, less dramatic but deeply fulfilling. She began teaching full-time. traveling to schools where children didn't have access to instruments. She helped raise funds for music programs and donated old pianos to community centers. Her mission was no longer to perform. It was to help others find their own voices. In small towns, she met children who had never touched a piano before. Their eyes lit up when they pressed a key and heard a sound come alive. She would kneel beside them and say, "See, even a single note can change the air around you." Never forget that. Word spread about her kindness and her quiet way of teaching, but she never sought attention. She believed that music should speak louder than names. One day, during a visit to a small coastal school, a little boy approached her with a handmade card. On it, he had drawn a piano and written in shaky handwriting, "When I grow up, I want to make people feel what you made me feel." She held the card close to her chest. In that moment, she understood something deeply. The true purpose of her journey wasn't just to play. It was to awaken something in others, something that could outlive her. Years later, long after she had stopped performing publicly, her students carried on her work. Some became teachers, others performers, some composers. Her melodies traveled through their hands, woven into new songs, new emotions, new lives. One evening, sitting by her window as the sun set, she played her final composition, a gentle piece filled with warmth. She called it "The Tune That Lives Forever." The music floated softly through the open window, drifting out into the world where it would find its way into someone else's heart, just as Mr. Gray's lessons had found their way into hers. When the last note faded, she smiled, whispering into the golden light. The song never really ends, it just finds another player. Outside, a breeze carried the faint echo of her melody through the streets, past the corners where street performers played, past open cafes and quiet alleyways. Somewhere someone paused, listening, and just like that the tune continued, alive, endless, and full of heart.